A lot of people don't understand what really constitutes a mistake in League and how big of a mistake it actually is. I think it's one of the most overlooked issues right now with League is that people believe that a mistake is just somebody playing well below the level that they're used to seeing at that elo. So, for example, if somebody fails Flash, because that's kind of a rare occurrence, and just like a bad thing to happen every time that it happens, people are going to assume that that is such a bad mistake, it's such an egregious mistake, that therefore that determines what is a bad mistake in League and what isn't. But this is actually really a bad mentality to have when it comes to playing League, because if you believe that those are the worst mistakes that are being made, even though those things are just going to inevitably happen over time at some point, you're going to miss the bigger picture, which is when you're evaluating your mistakes in League, or even just trying to objectively look at somebody's mistakes in League, if you're trying to coach or watching a game, you have to understand that the biggest mistakes are the mistakes that lead to the worst outcomes as a result, that cost your team or yourself the most as a result of the mistake. So an innocuous mistake, like not shoving a wave in or recalling at the wrong time, or the enemy team flash ults you before a Baron or something like that, may not seem like it was that bad of a mistake because it was much harder to fix the mistake or much harder to outplay, or less obvious to you that that was even a mistake in the first place, like with the wave or recalling at the wrong time. But it is a mistake nonetheless that costs you a lot more than a mistake where you fail Flash but end up living, or you fail Flash and die, but there's no objective up and it's not really that big of a deal that you died and it cost your team like 300, 400 gold, whereas the Baron might cost your team thousands of gold, plus lots of people dying to try to stall them from doing it, or fighting while they have a big advantage. And so just in general in League, it's not fair or straightforward, but mistakes should really be measured by how much they're impacting the outcome of the game, if what you care about when you're talking about mistakes is getting better and winning more games. If you approach it with this mentality that it's just playing below expectations for your rank or something like that, then the issue with that is you're going to identify a lot of things as mistakes that aren't worth spending a lot of time thinking about, because they didn't really cost you all that much, or won't cost you all that much in the average long run. But mistakes that did cost you a lot, are much more important. And the other thing, of course, with mistakes is, like I was just getting into, is that some mistakes are directly punished, and so you can see the consequence of that thing happening. So maybe when you get flash ulted before the Baron and you die and get picked, and then they get the Baron, and that's like a game losing mistake in kind of the mid to late game, you can really only make like one or two of those mistakes as a team before the game's just completely over, regardless of how big of a lead you had even. And for you as an individual player, if you make one of those mistakes, sometimes if the game is on you and your teammates aren't that good and your teammates are going to make a couple of those mistakes, you making that mistake was the thing that lost you the game from your perspective, from what was in your control, because that was the only major thing you could have fixed, in like the mid to late game. So when you have mistakes, sometimes they're not punished like that. Like imagine the enemy team kills you, but they don't take Baron. It's still a really bad mistake, even if you don't see the bad outcome. So this is like results-based analysis versus actually looking at what could have occurred. And so if you understand that getting picked there, maybe you're at a lower rank, and so the enemy team doesn't capitalize off of you getting picked, and they just don't do Baron, or they choose to push mid instead or something like that. You have to recognize that the mistake was worse than the outcome that you saw, and remind yourself that that could have been a lot worse, that was a really bad mistake. And just because this team didn't punish you for it doesn't mean even the next team at your rank won't punish you for it. And especially as you start to climb in rank and get higher up, if you're trying to get better and better teams will punish you harder and harder and harder for those mistakes. So you really need to narrow down on, well, I didn't get super punished for this mistake in this game, I'm not going to be results oriented. I'm going to think about over 100 games, over 1,000 games. If I make this mistake in 100 games, how many times is that going to lose me the game? Or how many times is that going to result in something really bad happening, like a Baron take, even if it didn't happen this game? So that's really important to understand about mistakes in League. Like, to give a chess analogy, right? Just because you lose your queen in chess, a lot of players are going to say, "Wow, like what a mistake, what a blunder! Like, you can't lose your queen. That's terrible." And that's partially because we're used to, if you lose your queen in chess and you're like not a very good chess player, a casual chess player, it's basically because you just blundered and gave it up for free, right? And so it's really game losing. But a high elo chess player or somebody who's really good at the game might be choosing to trade their queen for some ultimate advantage that's going to allow them to win the game or have a really good shot at winning the game. And so just losing your queen in and of itself doesn't mean that that was a bad move in chess. What matters is the impact that it's going to have on the outcome of the game, and you should treat League the same way. So just because somebody screws up and something goes really, really wrong, and they fail flash and they miss every single one of their abilities and they auto the minion 3 times instead of autoing a champion, and they die, if that happens to them in the mid game and it's just one death and they didn't even have a shutdown and it didn't really matter and there were no objectives up and the other team got nothing out of it other than the 300 gold, maybe 450 gold if they had an assist on it, and that's it. Like, that's not good. It's still a mistake, but it's not the worst mistake in the world. So you could be a player who's 0 and 10 and making 10 of those mistakes throughout the game, having those deaths, and it's not going to be as bad as a player who's 10 and 1, who their one death is like right before Baron spawning, like we talked about, getting caught out, giving the enemy team that Baron, and then the enemy team being able to end the game off of taking Baron. The reality is that, well, sure, overall that 10 and 1 player might have played much better than the 0 and 10 player. The reality is, and it's hard to accept responsibility in such a, severely, a game where the difference in the performance of the two players is so severe and so obvious that there's such a stark contrast between the two. But you have to accept that if you're that 10 and 1 player and you make that mistake and you kill yourself and you cost your team the Baron or that major objective, that's on you, and you lost the game for your team, not the 0 and 10 player who died randomly at 10 times that didn't really matter a whole lot. Now, again, if you're dying 10 times, probably it's adding up and not doing too well. But take like the best case scenario, right? Look at somebody like the boss, right? Whose strategy revolves around dying, but in a way where he's denying his opponent's CS and picking up a lot of CS himself, getting ahead in XP and in gold despite dying a lot. And creating these objective bounties and shutdowns on the top laner for his team to pick up, which once they do will actually like really even out the gold, while allowing him to play a pretty simple, straightforward game that works for him, that he understands, right? Now, dying in League is bad, but if the boss dies in League and draws 2 people top and gets to farm perfect CS on the minion wave that he's proxying, and chunk the enemy top laner to half HP, and they have to recall and they're like missing minions and XP and stuff like that. This death is like really actually quite good. It's not even really a mistake, right? It was very intentional, and the outcome of the death was literally positive. A support player could go in, and start a fight and die, and then their team gets 3 kills. And sure, they died. Maybe there was a way they could have done that without dying, but if that was the only way that they could get the enemy team to commit so that they would get these 3 kills or lock them in place or something like that, and they happened to die, maybe they didn't have all their tools available to them, then, so be it. It's still a good play. So dying in League isn't always bad. All deaths are not created equal. The Leona going in and killing herself but getting her team 3 kills, or the boss going in, not really going in, but getting collapsed on by their jungler and creating that pressure from drawing their jungler top lane in the early game, getting to spot out where the enemy jungler is, and getting to collect more golden XP than the enemy top laner anyways, is not a bad death or a mistake. It's literally just good. And so you need to get away from this idea that because something looks bad or looks egregious in League, that is the be-all end-all for what is a bad mistake. You need to focus on the mistakes that you're making that are the most impactful, that are game losing, because you might have an outstanding game. In fact, the 10 and 1 example is a little bit more rare. And usually in a solo queue game at your, at your main rank, you can expect to make a bad mistake and still have a chance to win the game. People do it all the time. But there's a lot of games where somebody will go like 20-6 or 20-5 or like 15-5. And it's like, these are games that people are saying, I played so well this game. I did like so much right. But depending on what those 5 or 6 deaths were, if those threw 2 Barons out of 2 in the game, or threw 1 out of 2 Barons in the game, or cost your team soul, or something like that, or those mistakes, like happened all together back to back to back, and you lost a lot of tempo, you lost a lot of pressure, you lost a lot of gold, and you lost all your turrets or something like that, then it doesn't really matter that you were fed and did so well in the other parts of the game. The reality is that you cost your team the game with those couple of deaths that you had, that were really bad mistakes at the wrong time for your team. So the other thing I want to say about this really quickly too is that League is a snowbally game where early game matters more than later into the game, but late game matters a lot because, like I said, we're using a lot of examples of, okay, they get Baron because that's probably like the one death, like getting Baron or getting Soul. It's like this one death that has the most impact in the game is if you get picked before one of these objectives. But it's more important to focus on your mistakes actually in the laning phase, not in the mid to late game, because the laning phase will be repeated every single game, and it's more in your control and more straightforward than the mid to late game. And there's a lot of different ways that you can play mid to late game. There's a lot of macro that's going on, obviously, but you don't have to play the macro game perfectly. You just need to not be the person who's blundering Baron or Dragon or Soul away or something like that. If you can just do that in the mid game, your mid game macro is going to be better than most people, even if you don't understand the macro elements. So in the mid to late game, just be cognizant of when those objectives are coming up and don't get picked before them. Play safe, and support your teammates that are playing too aggressively, so that maybe they have less chance of dying, or ping them off, of what they're trying to do if it's too aggressive. But really, you should be focusing in on the laning phase, and the laning phase goes the same way, right? The same concept applies, which is a lot of people will look at like a fight, that they could have won or something like that, but they missed, 2 abilities. And it's like, you're going to miss some abilities at some point. Nobody's perfect. Nobody's a robot. So maybe the mistake really wasn't missing the 2 abilities. Maybe it was going for such a thin fight that came down to you hitting every single ability. Or, maybe there was a mistake that you made in lane that led you into that situation in the first place, with your minion wave being in a certain spot, or something like that. Or maybe in lane, you don't pay attention to where the enemy jungler is and you get ganked, and, bot lane, my lane, you're playing bot lane, you get double killed, right? Because you didn't pay attention where the enemy jungler was, you didn't ward. Are you going to blame your jungler for what their jungler did? Or are you going to, are you just going to write off the mistake that you made and say, well, there was nothing I could do about that because that's their jungler? That's not a good mentality to have. That's not how you judge mistakes in League. If you want to win, if you want to get better and win more, you need to think about how you can do everything that's in your control to impact the outcome of the game. And so if that means saying, hey, we saw their jungler, a minute ago clearing towards bot lane, and we didn't respect that their jungler could have been here, and so we played too far up, or we were shoving our wave instead of letting them push into us, or we went in when their jungler could have been bot and we hadn't seen him in a minute or two, or we even knew that he was pathing bot. Maybe we died on vision sometimes. Maybe we didn't ward when we could have warded, etc. There's a whole plethora of things that you can do to prevent yourself from dying to these jungle ganks, and a lot of players will just blame the jungler when it really has nothing to do with their jungler, right? Do you think that both junglers are just going to permanently follow each other around on the map and clear the exact same direction in the exact same time? That's never going to happen. Obviously, some jungler is going to get some gold advantage somewhere that's going to give them a different amount of gold than the enemy jungler. They're going to be recalling at different times. Sometimes junglers are going to be pathing different ways, or they're going to end up vertically jungling and stuff like that. It's this idea that a jungler is always going to be exactly where the enemy jungler is, or always the same strength to fight them there, is just ridiculous, right? Even some champions could be even. It could be the start of the game, could be 0-0. One jungler might have a faster clear speed than another jungler. One jungler might choose to full clear, and the other one might choose to go for an early gank and skip some camps. One jungler, their champion might win a 3v3, whereas the other jungle champion loses that 3v3, especially given what, let's say, your bot lane is or their bot lane is. And so your jungler's not pathing towards you because of that, or not coming at all for the fight because they know that you'll lose even if you're there. So there's lots of reasons why the jungler might not be, matching their jungler. So you've got to protect yourself. I think that's the easiest one to point out as an example in lane, because we're talking about mistakes that you're in control of that lead to you losing the game. And I think a lot of times people write off, oh, well, I died to the jungler. It's not that big of a mistake because I couldn't have seen that coming, or, they dedicated an extra player to my lane. And so it's like not a mistake that I have to account for, right? Like much more egregious if I die once 2v2 than if if we get double killed to their jungler. But that's not true, right? If getting double killed by their jungler and losing dragon or something like that, losing a minion wave into your turret, if that causes you to lose all that stuff, then that's a much worse mistake than, you dying as a support or something like that 1v2 and your AD carry being able to like stick around and collect the wave and nothing happens. Obviously, one is going to have a way worse impact on the outcome of the game, and so you need to take full responsibility for the things that are going to have a big impact on the outcome of the game. Now, there was a really interesting comment which got me into wanting to reiterate this point, because I've kind of talked about this before. I think in the coin flipping video that this is really the way that you should think about mistakes in League. But there's another point here, which was kind of an interesting comment, which is somebody was talking about an older video that I did about whether supports are elo inflated or not. And that's a whole nother topic, so we don't have to get into whether that is or isn't the case. I mean, there's that video for that. But so they asked an interesting question, which is, they said, in my opinion, the biggest factor that makes a role elo inflated is fundamentally how many mistakes they can make and still have a positive influence in the game. You kind of go over the concept in your video about coin flipping and why League is a passive game. Generally speaking, when players are similar skill level, it's very difficult to consistently outplay the enemy. Instead, the consistent way to climb is to wait for the enemy team to make a mistake and to try to capitalize on it. Therefore, if a player makes a major blunder, they would normally be punished by getting into a significant unfavorable position, depending on the severity of the mistake. The game may as well be over for them. For example, in top lane, if you take a bad fight early, it's very possible that the enemy top laner can permanently freeze the wave and deny you both XP and CS. In bot lane, the ADC could get frozen on or dove constantly after having waves stacked against them. If this happens to a top or an ADC player, the best these players can do is lose gracefully and hope someone else will carry the game for them. Granted, losing gracefully is a skill that many League players lack. At this point in the game, they no longer have a positive impact on the game. They're just trying to minimize the negative impact they have. However, supports have options even if they royally screw up. If they make a mistake that causes bot lane to be over, the support can roam. The support doesn't have to feel the direct consequences of their mistake and still have proactive win cons that most other roles just do not have. If a single chess player had the ability to undo a move when they made a mistake, wouldn't he be elo inflated compared to every other chess player? So interesting question, but there's a lot of parts to it that I think I disagree with. The problem that I have with this is the whole thing kind of assumes that a support player can make a bunch of mistakes and that it's not going to impact the outcome of the game. And that's not true, right? Like a support player can really royally screw up bot lane and they're still going to have a huge negative impact on the outcome of the game in bot. So while it's sort of true that a support can just like leave bot lane and go make positive plays somewhere else on the map, it doesn't mean that there aren't severe negative consequences to what they've just done. So if you lose 2v2 bot because you played poorly as a support, and now you're abandoning your AD carry 1v2, what do you think is going to happen? Your AD carry is going to do really poorly and probably get really tilted, and your chances of winning the game are going to be very low as a result of that happening. Now, there are games, right, where support is able to just completely abandon ship and move around the map and make positive plays happen in other areas. But I would ask a couple of questions, right? Like, one, can jungle not do the same thing? Can jungle not walk into top lane and dive turret and give a kill to the enemy top laner and completely screw up a gank and ruin the lane for somebody, and then just avoid ever going back top lane and then go make positive impacts on mid, on bot lane, etc.? The reality is that both jungle and support, while they have the ability to like go not have to lane versus the mistake that they made, it comes down to this point of, oh, it feels bad. They don't have to feel the negative effect of what they're doing. And the reason why I tied this to this concept about mistakes in League and how we actually value mistakes in League is that, well, you don't, maybe if you completely abandon ship, which isn't always the right thing to do, but even if you do abandon ship and just never return bot lane after dying 2v2, you still, just because you don't lane versus the negative consequences of your actions, just because you don't feel pressured in lane with an item disadvantage, doesn't mean that you aren't facing the consequences of your action as it relates to winning or losing the game. Of course, the mistake that you made is still going to impact whether you win or lose the game. I guess the idea is that, so that's number one. And it definitely applies to jungle, maybe even more so, because jungle can really just leave and never come back to that lane. They can free farm in their jungle and play for other lanes and just never come back to that lane. It's not the same for support, right? A support is going to have to return bot. If you completely abandon bot lane and just never returned there, you would be getting like way less XP. You would not be hitting level 6 at the appropriate time. You probably wouldn't be able to find enough plays in top and mid in most games to even recover the mistake that you made in the first place. Your AD carries 2v1. They could get frozen on, just like you said they could do to a top laner, for example. Especially if you're not there to help break it as a support. They could get ganked and dove because you're not there, especially at higher rank, right? The higher you go, the more your AD carry is going to get dove if you abandon them like that. But even in lower elo, right, your AD carry, it's kind of a trade-off, right? Like in lower elo, your AD carry will die more 2v1 because they don't know how to just farm safely 2v1 and allow positive things to happen on the other side of the map. The higher up you get, the better your AD carry is at farming 1v2 and kind of allowing you to make plays on the other side of the map. But their jungler will recognize that your AD carry is like a free meal, and they'll just, come dive your AD carry over and over again if you do that. So it's, kind of an interesting trade-off there as you go up. But no, I don't think that just because a jungler can mess up a lane or a support can mess up a lane and then roam a lot or like abandon ship on that lane doesn't mean that their elo inflated because of that, because their mistake is just as likely to cost them the game as if an AD carry made the mistake. So imagine, for example, that an AD carry really messes up a 2v2 fight bot lane and you get double killed, and now their support starts roaming. They're just as likely to win the game as the exact same scenario, except it was the support's fault that they lost the 2v2 and got double killed. So how is the outcome of the game going to be any different if you have a 0-2 bot lane, either caused by the AD carry or caused by the support, but now the support is choosing to roam and try to salvage the game in other ways? So an AD carry and a support could literally both lead to the exact same scenario happening, and the outcome on the game would be no different. Now, if you want to say that it's because of the flexibility that the support has or that the jungler has to not return to that lane and be able to focus on making, like he said, they get to make proactive plays around the map. I don't really agree with the idea that an AD carry, a mid laner, and a top laner, once they start losing lane, can never create a proactive play throughout the game ever. I completely disagree with that. One of the reasons why I disagree with that is I was just thinking I played a top game, and whenever I play top lane on my main account, like autofilled, I'm generally pretty terrible at CSing and pretty terrible at laning top. And that makes sense, right? Like I'm a support player, not used to playing the role. Of all of the roles that I play, it's probably my weakest role. I think we did a three-way trade and I ended up top. We won the game, but a lot of times when I play top lane, I'll pick like Malphite or Shen because I'm used to playing tank champions, and I'll lose a lot of CS, but I'll make a lot of proactive plays from top lane that help my team get ahead and win. So, for example, in this game on Malphite, I wonder if we could even see it. But on this game on Malphite, it's probably out of my match history at this point. Yeah, it is. I had an opportunity once I got level 6 to just leave top lane and roam mid. And I just roamed mid, flanked their mid laner, basically did the same thing I would do roaming on a support, and just ganked their mid laner and killed him with my mid. So one of the advantages that I have when I play top lane, one of the ways I'm able to win, even though I'm autofilled, is I'm going to go down 30, 40 CS. That's an inevitability when you're putting someone who doesn't play the role, maybe plays 1 or 2 games of top lane a year. When you're putting someone like that versus somebody who's played thousands of games of top lane, and I'm playing like a weak tank champion in lane, and they're picking, some giga strong champion that they've mastered, obviously I'm going to go down in CS and have a hard time. Sometimes I'm going to die. But that doesn't mean just because I'm like down in items, just because I'm dying to them sometimes, doesn't mean that I can't make proactive plays around the map. It's totally possible to leave top lane just as you can on support. Now, is it a little bit worse because, I'm going to lose gold and XP? Yeah, absolutely. Like it could be difficult if you're losing and getting shoved in the entire time to find an opportunity to roam mid where you don't lose gold and XP for choosing to roam mid. When are you as Malphite in a losing lane like that going to get a chance to shove out your wave into the enemy turret so that you could roam mid for free? It's not going to happen very much. And so that way I agree with that. But that's not to say, right, obviously support and jungle are more proactive roles or get to be more proactive with less consequence than other roles. In fact, support probably more so because jungle, especially nowadays, does really need to clear their camps quite a bit. It's really important to level up your camps to get golden XP throughout the game. And so junglers spend a lot of time making sure that they're clearing their camps and looking for ganks only if they're right next to the situation as they're clearing, or in between their camps being down if they're not just resetting and the gank looks free. So a lot of junglers, it depends on their playstyle, but a lot of consistent junglers like Agarin, I think I'm saying his name wrong, but look to just kind of full clear and make these consistent plays in the jungle. So what I think here about this whole situation is obviously support and jungle are roles that get to be more proactive. If we said that, I think jungle and support are elo inflated roles because they get to be so proactive without losing a lot of golden XP and resources. They get to be more proactive than AD carry, than mid lane and top lane, and they get to make some proactive plays even if they've messed up and gotten behind, whereas it's harder for a player in ADC or in mid lane or in top lane to make a proactive play if they're behind, because it's harder for the top laner or the mid laner to get their wave in and then roam if they're losing their lane, and it's harder for an ADC to do that because usually the champions don't have the tools, or even if they do, it can be difficult to like roaming on ADC is obviously worse than probably any other role. So if we said that, I would agree with that. Obviously, jungle and support are more proactive roles, and could even be proactive or more proactive than other roles if they're behind or have made a mistake. But it is true also, by the way, that a jungler that's getting his team behind or a support that's getting his bot lane behind, in some ways can be less proactive, because if you are losing bot lane and your wave gets frozen, and the correct thing for you to do is to go bot lane and try to help unfreeze that wave, you actually can end up in the same situation as we talked about with mid and top, or because of the wave, or because of where your AD carries at, or the threat that they're facing. A lot of times, it actually becomes harder to roam when you're behind on support too. And that's another thing people don't recognize. We talked in this video about how people blame junglers for not being able to match the enemy jungler all the time. Again, support cannot always match a roam from the enemy support. So, for example, you'll have a support player who's winning lane, and they're able to shove out their wave, and that's a roam timer for them when they shove out that wave, because the support needs golden XP too, and their 80 and the support needs to make sure that their 80 carry is getting golden XP. So if they can shove out their bot wave because they're winning, now I can roam mid as a support. But if I'm the losing support and we're getting shoved in, can I really afford to like roam mid and match the roam or something like that when I'm going to lose the entire minion wave of XP, and when I'm leaving my 80 carry to potentially get dove? And sometimes we don't even, like, yes, we think that their support is going to go mid lane, but I don't know whether their support is going to commit 100% to walking all the way mid, or whether their support has just recalled and I'm missing the XP for no reason, or even whether their support has kind of faked that they're going mid and is just going to stay bot and dive my 80 carry. Or even if I match the support's roam to mid, if their jungler and their 80 carry stay bot and dive my 80 carry 2v1, what's going to happen in that situation? So it's a lot more complicated than just always be there whenever the enemy support is going to be there. Of course, you have other discrepancies as well. Just like a jungler may choose to keep farming because they're behind the enemy jungler and need to hit level 6, can be the same thing with support. If their support hits level 6 early because they're winning and they're able to roam with ult to mid, am I going to match their roam and continue to put myself further behind in XP by going to mid while I'm level 5? Depends on the situation, but a lot of times, no, I'm going to try to stay and get level 6 myself so that we can make something happen when we have the turn and the opportunity to make something positive happen there. So that's kind of the gist of it. Understand that mistakes in League, really, it's not about how bad it looks, how egregious it is. It's about the outcome that it's having on the game. And then number two, yes, support and jungle are more proactive roles than other roles, but that doesn't mean they can always be wherever the enemy jungler is, or always be where the enemy support is. They can't match every gank, they can't match every roam, and it wouldn't make sense for them to do it even if they could. So you've got to take responsibility, especially for your actions in lane, because lane is the same every single game, and it's the earliest part of the game that leads to the most snowballing, right? It's where you get it's where you get the advantage. And so you need to make sure that in the two parts of the game that we're talking about here, that in lane, you clean up your lane, and whether it's 1v1 in top lane or mid lane, or whether it's 2v2 in bot lane, that you clean up the way that you're laning so that you're not dying very often 2v2, 1v1, and that you're avoiding jungle ganks, wasting their time and absorbing pressure while continuing to get ahead and not lose any sort of advantage off of that. And instead of blaming, your jungler, or even if you don't blame your jungler, saying, oh, well, that's just not that big of a deal because they sent an extra person for us. Instead, take responsibility for the severity of the mistakes that you're making. It could be very innocuous. It could be you get forced out of lane, and because you're back in base, they get a dragon. Well, why did that happen? That's not just something that, should inevitably happen. You want to know why you lost that dragon and why you put yourself at a lower chance of winning the game because of the choices that you made, so that you can improve at the way that you lane and consistently make sure that you're getting ahead and winning the game. And then in the mid to late game, yes, there's a lot of macro we've been talking about in the last couple of days that can help you make some, good decisions about where you should be going in order to maximize your team's gold and XP and take towers and stuff like that to get more gold. But it doesn't mean that you should you don't even need all of that. All that you need is in a game where there are going to be a couple of blunders every game from people getting caught before a major objective. Just never be one of the people who's getting caught before a major objective. Simple as that. If you're never getting caught before a major objective like that in the mid to late game, you're going to be a lot better, like I said, than most of the people playing that. Yes, support and jungle are more proactive roles, but I don't think that makes them Oh, actually, yeah. Them being more proactive roles, them having a bigger impact on the game, that is one of the things that does make them easier to climb on if you're good at the role. So actually, that part does make them kind of elo inflated. The part that I take issue with is saying that a support or a jungler is elo inflated because they can screw up a lane and then just leave. I think ignores the reality of the situation, which is that a lot of times your best play is not to just leave, you know, and on support even more than jungle, right? Like jungler doesn't have to sit there laning with the person, and most of the time it is actually going to be bad or bad to regank a losing lane over and over again. Whereas on support, if you're losing, a lot of the time your correct play is to come back bot and help your AD carry and try to mitigate those losses. So support spend a ton of time suffering from the consequences of their actions, suffering through a losing lane and trying their best to mitigate their losses and break freezes and all of the stuff that mid laners and top laners deal with too. And of course, they're literally directly tied to their ADC. So if it can happen to their ADC, it can happen to the support. So I don't think in that sense it makes them elo inflated, because if you mess up and you die 2v2 as a support or as an ADC, it's going to have the same impact on the outcome of the game. And so you're going to be more likely to lose, whether you kind of screw off and roam all game on support, or whether you choose to return bot and protect your AD carry. It's still going to be the same. You're going to suffer the consequences in terms of winning or losing of making that mistake. And so that's not going to gain you any more elo, just because you can like leave bot lane and abandon ship after you've died 2v2, obviously. So I hope that helps you guys understand the mistakes and stuff that you're making in League, so that you can better evaluate those things in your games, or if you're ever watching your replays, which nobody does. But, in your games, think about, okay, I died 5 times this game, but what death did I have that was the worst, that had the worst impact on the outcome of the game, that really cost us a major objective, or lost our lane, or screwed up our tempo, or something like that, and kind of turned the game around. And how could I have eliminated that situation? And you just do that over and over again, and eventually you'll have made enough of those mistakes and fixed enough of them that you'll just be really good. Simple as that. So good luck in solo queue, and have a wonderful day.